I tried making a 35-minute short film, and guess what happened? It didn't happen. Hey guys, it's Storyboard, and back in 2017, I set off to do a whole short film by myself. The film was meant to be a spiritual successor to my student films back when I was at school, from the mood to the familiar themes to similar stories, and I had a lot of expectations for it, which I'll definitely talk about later on in this video. Now, between 2017 and 2019, I finished a whole animatic of the short film, with scratch voices and rough acting by my colleagues. And this short film ended up being 35 minutes long. I basically crammed a whole feature film into this 35-minute short film. For those who have been following this channel for years, you know that I've tried making the short film and it ended up being canceled and abandoned. I decided to pull the brakes around the year 2019 or 2020, I can't remember, but this is when I decided I can't continue with this. Now, I reflect back on it now, several years later, and I kind of have a clear idea of why it didn't go the way it did. I want to talk about key factors of why it didn't go well, why it failed, and I want to talk about what I learned from it, how it kind of influenced my future work after I decided to abandon it. And if I were to ever do something similar to this, how would I do it differently? Because I also think it's good to see quote-unquote failure as lessons. And I think in order to be good at what you do, you have to screw up a lot. You have to fail a lot. So I want to talk about the factors that I learned from it so you guys can be aware or be more cautious of it for your own work. In other words, things that you might want to avoid. So if you guys just want to know why this film failed, please be sure to follow the time code that I'm providing to skip this stuff, because what I'm going to talk about is the overall story of what the short film was all about. If you guys want to hear what the short film was all about, just continue watching. If you guys just don't want to hear about it because it's a lot, again, I'm providing the time code down below. The way I would describe this film is Cooking Master Boy meets Kung Fu Panda meets Dolores, which is one of my favorite stories, but embracing a lot of the Southeast Asian culture that I grew up with, Philippines, Indonesia, etc. It takes place on the sacred island, where cooking was a religion. Chefs were seen as holy priests, and sometimes the food would be offered to the spirit world or to gods. But they took this religion so seriously, so if you, let's say, offended a chef, and let's say there was a duel between chefs and you lost, you were branded to leave the island. You were exiled to leave the island. The story focused on this little boy tiger and a little boy dog. They're both kind of like homeless street kids. Everyone hates the tiger and everyone is just really weirded out by the dog, who was kind of autistic. But his sense of smell was so good that he can see all the secret combinations of recipes, whereas the tiger strived for perfection and was more of an artist among the duo. So the two form a friendship, try to experiment with their own dishes and things like that. Time goes by, they grow older, and they become the new hot things. They become the new hot chefs. And they become the leading figures of this island, until one point the dog decides to leave the island to venture the world, to see the world, whereas the tiger just wants to stay. So they split their ways and say their friendly goodbyes. But years pass by again. The dog comes back to realize that the tiger has become this chef tyrant. He's been kind of like bullying other chefs off the island, exiling chefs on the island. This is the tiger's way of taking sort of revenge of all the chefs that looked down on him when he was a kid. He kind of becomes Ramses, whereas the dog kind of becomes Moses, where he's more wise, he's seen the world outside, and he tries to convince the tiger that there's more to cooking than trying to please some gods. But the tiger doesn't have it, so these two sort of have a falling out. Oh, I forgot to mention, this whole story is being told far into the future, where the tiger is the only one on the island. He's old, and he's telling this little girl, who's kind of like an unwelcome guest on this island. So it's about the tiger telling this stranger, this girl, why this island fell apart, the tale of this cursed island. And of course, there's a lot of backstories that I won't get into. Actually, maybe what I can say is that the girl came to the island looking for the dog because in another island, the dog saved her life somehow. I can't remember, but yeah, she's trying to find him. But something I was really proud while working on this film was the idea that I had for this ending. So because no one was cooking for the proposed gods anymore, the island became desolate. Ghosts roamed around this island. They haunted this tiger. They're punishing him. So this tiger is kind of like tortured. But the only thing that's keeping him sane is one specter that protects him from the other ghosts, which is his childhood friend, the dog. At this point, the dog is this cursed ghost in this island who's kind of stuck. And in the animatic, it's revealed that the tiger is responsible for this. So he carries a lot of guilt, and he just lost the purpose of what's the point of cooking anymore, if something that he's loved so much caused him so much grief and the devastation of others. It's gotten to the point where he forgot how to cook. And to sort of repent and make amends, the tiger and this girl, who reminds him about the good things that can come from cooking, and slightly teaches him how to get back into cooking, cook together, and he starts to relearn how to cook. And yeah, so they're cooking together to offer it to the ghosts so they can finally cross over to the afterlife with their soul cleansed and their belly sated. They can finally cross over happy. And it was going to end with him helping his childhood friend, who's a specter at this point, who's a ghost, cross over to the afterlife with the first dish that they made together. So even talking about it again, I realized that there was something that I had going on for the story. Like, there's a lot of soul in it, literally. But I also want to talk about why this film sort of, failed. So the first one is obvious. The project just became way too big. 35 minutes long. That's how long the animatic was, and that's how long the short could have been, but because there's a lot of editing and there's a lot of timing issues, it could have easily bumped up to more than that. Now, I'll talk about reasons how it ended up being 35 minutes long. I was actually aiming for something below 10 minutes, but I'll talk about why it ended up going over that. But I do want to say that the project was just so big that it was kind of hard to sort of manage or to keep track or to even do revisions and retakes and sort of get a clear picture of where this film was going. And also because it was so big, I just couldn't fathom how long a 35-minute film would take me to finish. The original plan was to get other people to help me finish this film once I had the storyboards and the animatic done, but at the same time, there was just so many issues with the foundation of the film, like the story itself. Even I couldn't fathom how long that pre-production stage would take me. Again, the thing with big projects like a 35-minute short film, there's more things to worry about in terms of quality control versus a 5-minute short film, or even less than that, where it's easier to sort of manage the quality in everything under that 5-minute range. The story was also too ambitious. The thing is that the way I planned this out was a feature film idea or a feature film story squished into 35 minutes long. There were flashbacks, there were backstories, there were different memories and times here and there. There were multiple montages. And I think the reason why I did that was because I wanted to show that this was going to be a sort of magnum opus of what my student films have been building up to. I wanted it to be quite epic and vast. And I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a very ambitious goal. But I think the thing that my previous short films have taught me is that you can make a grand moment or a big story out of a very small moment or a very small scene. And I think I just fell into the issue of I want the short film to be everything, whereas a short film, you kind of have to choose and pick what is the priority of what this film should be or what kind of story that you're trying to tell. So I'm sort of in this mindset of thinking smaller nowadays. But like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a big story if done right, but this short film that I was doing, there were a lot of things that I was doing wrong, and I'll get to that next. So I need to talk about the overall process of this film. So when I was trying to come up with the story or how it would play out, I would actually make a collection of beat boards of where the film starts, what happens, what are the key moments, and how it ends. If you saw those drawings by itself or those key moments, it feels like a feature film. It doesn't feel like a short film anymore. That was my roadmap, but let me tell you the thing that actually bit me in the ass while working on this film. So I had this weird process of boarding the film and writing the film at the same time. Or I would board the whole film and then add dialogue and prepare the script after everything was boarded in some cases. And I think this is a very chaotic way of making something because you're kind of juggling the visual storytelling versus what is the actual story. I think I swallowed this belief of you don't need to write your film, you just need to board it and then you can figure it out later. I think this advice actually bit me in the ass. Now, some people could work with it, but I think it was just hard for me to determine what this film was about while I was drawing it. And those are two different sort of worlds to try to handle all at the same time. And so when I was working on the film, the focus would get lost. The overall direction would get wishy-washy. And when I showed it to acquaintances, my friends, family, they didn't really understand what the story was trying to say, or they've just felt alienated by the story that I was trying to tell. I think if I were to do this sort of process again, I would write the whole thing first. I would write a few sentences for each chapter or each scene and just summarize what actually happens. And then I'll write a script of it, because I think with the script, you can actually determine how long the film might be. Like there's this whole rule or thumb of rule where 1 page of script can equate to 1 minute of film. But you get the story and the context out of the way. I probably wouldn't move on to anything drawing related until all the writing was pretty much figured out. After that, it's purely visual storytelling, and I could make story changes within that, but I think what I did was I tried to juggle everything in one go. Another factor that screwed me over was the sort of expectations that I had for myself and for this film. Internally, I wanted this film to be sort of my magnum opus or spiritual successor to all the student films I've done in the past. Familiar stories and themes, and the emphasis on that whole emotional storytelling. I also had big expectations for myself for this one, where I wanted to hopefully have this film get nominated for an Oscar. I wanted that weird prestige. I wanted to look like I was one of the top people in the animation industry back then. So it's just another case of me building so much pressure for myself with factors that I had no control over. And when I felt like I couldn't achieve that goal, or when things were falling apart, I would get really sad and depressed and super demotivated and have this whole existential crisis about working on this film and continuing this craft. Later in life and after the cancellation of this film, I learned to think small, and I learned to only focus on factors that I have control over. So when I pursued future projects, my only goal was to finish something, learn something out of it, and put something in my portfolio, possibly have something that belongs to me for a potential IP. And when I just focused on the things that I had complete control over, that I knew that if I did this film, I will get this, I felt much lighter and happier with the process. When I started thinking about reception or potential opportunities that can come from this, potential awards and benefits, then I just stressed myself out even more, to the point that I was no longer having passion or fun with the filmmaking process. Now, the next one I want to talk about is something that not a lot of people talk about to this day, which is that you mature faster than your project. By the time I was working on a second draft of this project, so I was boarding new scenes or replacing scenes or completely rewriting the story, a lot of things have changed within me. The goals that I once had no longer resonated with me. The types of stories that I want to tell no longer related to me. It's also kind of the reason why I kind of stopped pitching around to studios, because I realized that all the ideas and the stories that I had 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it's stories that don't resonate with me anymore. And this was such a hard decision to make, because I know that I put in a lot of work to make this 35-minute animatic, and I can praise myself for even doing that. Not a lot of people have said they finished a 35-minute short film animatic, so there was a part of me that held pride in holding on to that. But I think I really had to convince myself that this was a project that I didn't really relate to anymore. And I actually finished a huge step of the filmmaking process. I made a 35-minute animatic. I think this is a good place to stop at and just walk away and move on, because I learned a lot making this project. This, to me, is where I would say this is a project that's done. I think the last reason that I'm going to talk about is I was just too busy with life in general and in work. Those were my biggest priorities. You know, with the short film that I was making, there was just no money involved. It was just made purely out of willpower, love, and just my time. Whereas my full-time job, that's where a lot of my income was coming from. And the thing is that work was starting to pick up for me. Around this time, I was transitioning from DreamWorks to Netflix, and Netflix was picking up a lot of work. And I was just so busy with that. Something that I wanted to bring up was that after graduation, I kind of had this ideal version of myself where I would be making films every day while having a full-time job on top of that. Reality hits and you realize how hard that is to maintain. So what I'm trying to say is I overestimated my own skills and underestimated how much work it is to maintain a work-life balance on top of having personal work where there is no money involved. So yeah, actually just talking about it again, going back to a past of my life working on this film, I realized that there was a lot of passion I had for this film. Even thinking about the story and summarizing it for you guys, I was onto something. I was cooking. But I think because I was too comfortable on embracing what worked for me on the student films without acknowledging that process's flaws, and too stubborn to think otherwise, worked against me in general. Now, in regards of the story itself, I actually stopped making it as a short story or a short film and tried to pitch it as a feature. And when I pitched it as a feature, I was told there's a lot of strong emotional sentiment. But if I were to sort of summarize the sort of feedback that I got, it kind of felt like a smaller Ghibli film like Ocean Waves or Only Yesterday, which isn't what a lot of American studios were looking for. It just didn't have that typical Western structure when it comes to a feature film. And of course, if I were to ever revisit this type of story again, I would make so many revisions to make the message stronger. Pretty much rewrite the entire thing. In terms of what I learned about this project and how I sort of move forward with future projects, it actually influenced me greatly. You see, I was working on a version of the Dusk's Flight short that was meant to be a much elaborate film, but because of how ambitious it was, I kept going back and forth and being a perfectionist. So I think after I sort of decided not to move forward with working on this short film, I had this mentality of just wrapping up loose ends of projects that had the potential of just wrapping up. Dusk's Flight was one of them. I just decided to just wrap it up in some way that's presentable. So what you see with that is a result of that. Another thing is that I've also been focusing more on smaller projects because I think it's better for me, at least. I think the thing that I want to learn is get better at situational scenarios, get better at building character or character moments, and I think short film projects are good at that. And also giving myself limitations where I work in a much more cheaper, limited style that just allows me to showcase what I can do in terms of coming up with characters and little stories. Working on this big 35-minute short film allowed me to see a lot of the insecurities I had and to see it, to embrace it, and to sort of move forward with it. So to those watching this video, you guys might see this as a failure, and in some ways it is, but at the same time, I learned a lot about myself, and I personally can't regret me going through the process of trying to make this film and flunking it, because the circumstance of that allowed me to grow. Also, again, I just want to remind that a lot of the things I wanted to gain from making this short film no longer resonated with me later on in life. Like being an Oscar-nominated person, that's no longer a big goal in my life because I've also expanded other areas in my life that are also more important. Working on this film and finishing it, I wanted to be seen in a better light, to be respected in the animation field, but I also realized that working in this industry, I've encountered a lot of people who are, let's say, Oscar-nominated, Oscar winners. They're up there, they're, leads and whatnot. They're prolific, they make a lot of money, everyone looks up to them. But a bunch of those people, their values don't line up with me, with some of them having this crazy ego, and some of them just being hard to work with. So I'd rather be someone that's good to my friends, good to my family, contributes to the community, and it's definitely dictate the type of work that I personally want to make. So yeah, working on this film, even though it'll never come out, it's abandoned, it contributed to a lot of the soul searching that I went through. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to talk about. Bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.